diversify. They tell you that the higher risk equals higher return, and they also tell you that to set it and forget it. All while they do the complete opposite of what they tell you of what they're telling you to do. You see, they're playing by a different set of rules, and then we are wondering why we can't get past the poor to middle class. But that's why the series is here, is because we're talking about how do we know what they know, and so we can do what they do. And so, in this series, we're now going to wrap this up by talking about the infinite banking concept. Okay, so this is really about how do you become your own bank. Now, I want to pause here because I want to give some warnings. This is not a get rich scheme. This is not about a product. You see, one of the things that I really feel sad about is when I go online and I see people lead with a product talking about uh, life insurance and saying this is how you can become your own bank, right? But they're tooting this thing, they're tooting this vehicle that can cause great harm. You see, at the end of the day, it's not just about the vehicle, but it truly is about the process. And so what it is again, is a process. It's a process first, utilizing a vehicle secondly. And it's a process for us to take advantage of accelerating our cash flow, but also utilizing uninterrupted compound interest. And so, if you recall from the second lesson, we talked about the different stages in which you're in, and we talked about, how they say that, they want you to put your money aside and use compound interest. And we talked about how compound interest is a tool, and a tool used in the right way at the right time can be very powerful. Compounding interest is not a bad thing when used the right way. When using the infinite banking concept the correct way, compounding interest is actually a huge benefit to us because it's not enacted alone. It's enacted in tandem with accelerating our cash flow as well. So you're operating at a two-pronged approach and strategy. So again, when we talk about the infinite banking concept, most people talk about the machine. The machine, the most famous machines right now are life insurance policies, and I see a lot of IUL discussions going on, right? But at the end of the day, just imagine that you're just a person that walks everywhere, take Uber, take taxi, X, Y, and Z, right? And then I ask you, what is driving? And then you come back to me with a car, a bus, a motorcycle. You see, those are the vehicles in which we drive, but that is not the process of driving. And so when you're online, you're seeing these people talk about, you can be your own bank by utilizing, whole life policy, IULs, X, Y, and Z. Be very careful because what they're talking about is the car. They're talking about the vehicle, but they're actually not talking about the process. And again, like a vehicle, if you don't understand the process, you get behind that vehicle. Now you're at a position where you can cause more harm to yourself and to others, potentially. Okay? So that's my spiel about, the dangers of, utilizing the infinite banking concept without the proper education. So what is, there you go. So what is infinite banking? Infinite banking is this. It's two things. It is the process, number one, and the machine, secondly. So what is the process? Well, the process is simply this. It is simply the process of taking back the banking functions in your life. And so when we talk about what the banking functions are, there's four basic functions that we're talking about. So we're taking control of the money supply in our estate, so how much money is in our realm of focus. It is also taking back control over the lending and borrowing process, the flow of money. Recall last week we talked about how the banks are really controlling how we flow with our money, right? They tell you to put your money in there for the long haul, and then they control they have all these hidden doors in the background. They do all these different things that makes the most use of your money while you let your money sit, right? We're taking back that control of the flow and the money supply, and then also taking back control of banking function. The banking functions is really how do we pass on our estate with minimal to no government intervention and tax free. That is what the infinite banking process really is about. Okay? And so, in order for us to change, get into this, there's two things we have to do. And it's not very hard. As most of us who drive know, driving's not really that hard once you've done it for a long time. Now, I'm not talking about driving a 18 wheeler like Deke did. I can drive. Remember Deke? You taught me how to drive a stick with my dad. Yeah, yeah. I learned how to drive a stick with Deke and Keys and my dad. But at the end of the day, it's not like driving a stick. But what it is like is basic driving. So when we're talking about the changes for using the infinite banking process, it starts with two things. Number one, it changes. You change one thing. You change where you put your savings first. The second thing you want to do is add a step, and that step is leverage. And so, if we recall, as we've gone through this course, we talked about the importance of credit and leverage and understanding that system. This is why we laid that foundation, because before you can talk about doing the infinite banking concept, you have to understand how to utilize your credit in the most efficient way. You have to understand how to also properly have your accounts and understand your expenditures, as we'll see later on. But at the end of the day, it comes down to those two things: changing one thing where you put your savings first, and then also adding the leverage component to it. So here's the traditional banking process. You earn your money, you take it, you put it inside the bank, and then you're able to do transactions with it, right? So you're able to go and buy groceries through a debit card, X, Y, and Z, right? Another banking function that you can do is, if you're good, you can have a savings account. And so for the last decade, we've been between 0% and 4%, right? Some high yield savings account has 5%, but you don't have that transaction thing. So at the end of the day, those two banking functions happen when you have a traditional banking. And then what happens is you can also, what happens is that you can also get a loan from the bank, right? So you put your money in, you have the access to have transactions, but what often happens is that even though you're saving, you have a minimum balance that you have to obtain or keep for a checking account. If you don't have that, you have to pay a balance. And then if you take a loan from the bank, you also have to pay the bank 7 to 12%, depending on what type of loan it is, right? Between car loan or a mortgage, 7 to 12%. Now, can anybody look at that and tell me what's wrong with that picture? It's not only the man crying, but if you look at those interest rates, you're paying, exactly, you're not getting anything. You're actually paying the bank to hold your money. If you have a car loan, you're paying, what, close to 7% on that car loan? And then if you get 4% savings, you're paying them 3% for them to hold your money. That is the traditional banking system. And we're trying to break away from that to become our own bank. And so how do we do that? Oh, let's take a step back. Let's recall how the bank makes money, right? So remember, last week we discussed when you put your money in the 4%, they lend it out 7% for a home. It goes to the seller and it goes back to the bank. They make that spread there. They make a spread when they have a car loan at 8%. And once they give it to the car dealership then takes the money, puts it back in the bank. They lend it back out. And then what happens? You have what? If you want to fix up your home, after that, you lend it out at 9%. They put it to the contractors. The contractors then put it back in the bank. They make a spread there. And then you have what? Unsecured loans, so credit cards. Again, 12%. So they're making a spread while your money sits inside the bank. So literally, essentially, you're literally paying them to hold your money. Now, when we said that to do the infinite banking process, it's literally two steps. One, it is to change where we put our savings, and number two is the added component of leverage. So our savings no longer goes to that traditional banking process, but what it does, it goes to the infinite banking machine. Notice I did not say a whole life policy. Notice I didn't say a HELOC or anything else like that. I said the infinite banking machine, because as you'll see later on here, with the infinite banking process, it truly is a process. And at the end of the day, if you understand the process, you don't even need cash. I'll say that again. If you understand the process, you can still use the infinite banking process, and you don't need any money. But that's where credit comes in. So we change where we put our savings first, the infinite banking machine, and then the second thing we do is we add the leverage component. So this is what it looks like. So before we get there, there's basic rules that we must follow when we're doing the infinite banking concept. We have to follow these rules. And this is what you're not getting when you listen to these individuals on Instagram. Rule number one, the infinite banking process is not for everyday transactions. We do not use the infinite banking concept to pay the bills. We could if it's a large enough bill and you have interest rates on them, but you don't pay the bills with it. You don't buy the gas with it. You don't buy the vacations with it. You literally, this is why we talked about this triangle. Remember, week 2 on budgeting sucks, we talked about where we are in our financial journey. So the first thing we had to do after we got out of extreme debt, right? When we use the traditional budgeting float program, after we've done that and we switch over to mindful cash flow spending, most of our effort and time should be focused on investing into guarding against uncertainty. When you guard against uncertainty, what do? You put 2 to 3 months reserve in what? A bank account, a high yield savings account, and gold, into other assets, right? Into holding cash. This is where your everyday transactions live, inside that place where you guard against uncertainty. And remember, it's not for everyday cash. So if you recall, week 2, we talked about the 4 kinds of accounts that we have. We have the peace amount account, the wealth control, the living wealth, and the charitable giving. These are where your everyday transactions come from. That's where we pay for every day, not the infinite bank. So, again, it's not for every day. Keep that in a traditional bank. We have 2 to 3 months of peace of mind, and we auto fund that every month. Every time you get cash in, you auto fund those accounts and make sure you keep at the same level so you never have to dip into your bank. Now, rule number 2, as we discussed in week 2, we want to, when we're talking about this, we don't want to use it for consumptive spending. Consumptive spending is spending that we do and we don't get anything from. So it's that vacation that we go on. It's the groceries. It's literally things that we spend money on to consume. We get one-time use. We get nothing back from. We do not use the infinite banking, the infinite bank for those kind of expenditures. Those again come from the 4 accounts that we discussed previously. So remember, we discussed the 4 different types of expenditures that we have. We have destructive expenditures, we have lifestyle expenditures, we have protective and productive. Just a quick review. Destructive expenditures are those expenditures that you borrow to consume from. It's also the one where you have your vices. So, drugs, alcohol, X, Y, and Z, in excess. That's where you have the destructive. You eliminate those. Your lifestyle expenditures, your vacation, X, Y, and Z. We don't do that. We don't spend it from there. We do, however, use our infinite banking for protective and productive spending because those put money back into you. The third thing we have to do is we must understand and have cash flow. You cannot not have cash flow with this because we are utilizing leverage. We have to make sure we're in a place in which our incoming cash flow is made up in enough time to cover the leverage bill that we have overhead. Okay? And then last but not least, we have to know and apply the principles of becoming both a good banker and a good customer. You see, with the infinite banking concept, you are both bank and customer. And you can't be a bad customer because you're cheating your bank system and it'll fail. Okay? So, how to become a good customer? Well, we're a good customer by 1, prioritizing savings. Our savings goes inside of our infinite bank. It does not go into any other account. The other accounts that we have are for petty cash. We also pay back our loans. That is literally one of the most important parts of this concept. We have to pay our loans back to be good customers. We have to have the mindset for medium to long-term savings. So remember how I said that savers have become losers with the velocity of money? Well, with this, because it's a 2-pronged approach, if you have the right vehicle, you can both accelerate yourself with cash flow and save at the same time. So you have to have this in mind that you're saving for the mid to long term. Do not expect day-to-day transactions from here. So we're not paying, for I was going to say Blockbuster, but that's gone a long time ago. We're not paying for Netflix, X, Y, and Z through here. We're not making it's not a payment system, and it's not for consumption spending. Now, once we take that hat off, we have to put our banker's hat on and think about this. As a good banker, you be quiet. As a good banker, we're concerned with 5xing or 10xing our money in our estate, and that's by utilizing the principles of leverage. If you remember, we talked about last week when we talked about how banks utilize the fractional reserve system, it's almost like that when you're utilizing your banking system. Number two, you want to make 400 to 1,300% on other people's money. And then last but not least, you have to save your money in one of the safest vehicles. And as you'll see, the banks use bank-owned life insurance, but that's a vehicle. That's not the process. But at the end of the day, you're resuming those roles of the bank for yourself. And so those are the principles of how you be a good customer and a good banker. These are the rules that we want to have when we're applying the infinite banking concept. If we don't understand these rules, if we don't understand these principles, utilizing this system just may not work. Okay? So, I want you to understand this. The infinite banking concept is relatively simple, but it is also a complex banking structure because you're utilizing both traditional banking and your own bank. So again, the traditional bank is used for petty cash, everyday expenditures, and your consumptive expenditures. That is your traditional banking. You're going to keep no more than 1 to 2 months worth of expenditures inside of your traditional banking, and you're going to auto flow those so you can keep it at the same level. And then everything else for the infinite banking system, that is where you're going to actually store your wealth. Your wealth is actually stored in the infinite banking, in your infinite bank. It is not stored in retirement. It could be if that's one of the vehicles, but at the end of the day, it's stored there. You want to use your infinite banking for investing, for creating and expanding your generational wealth, and you want to reclaim and recapture all the money that you ever spend. That is the structure that you're going to use for the infinite bank. So, let's talk about how it works. Okay, so the infinite bank works great, and the infinite banking system works great in 3 different scenarios. It's great for paying off a higher interest debts. It works great when you want to purchase cash flowing assets, and when you want to invest into your education. This is the system where it pays because it pays you back. These are the best scenarios. So, recall, the process is we change one thing. We change where we put our savings, and then we add the component of leverage. That's the process changes that we make to implement the infinite banking concept. So, first things first. We say for example, we had $10,000, right? Saved up wherever. We'll put our $10,000 in our infinite banking machine, cash or credit. But we'll have cash in there. On the bottom, those represents the collateralization. So literally what it's saying is this, is that whatever institution you use, they will use your $10,000 as collateral, and they'll give you an advance of 75%, which is 7,500 for you to use. Understand that? You have 10,000, they're going to keep 10,000, and they're going to give you 75%. It can be higher depending or lower depending on what instrument you use. But you're going to borrow other people's money, utilizing your money as collateral. After you've taken that out, you're going to save, for instance, the interest rate is going to be 5%. You'll then take that and place it towards what I call the opportunity zone, or the zone of opportunity. So then you'll use that to pay off credit cards, home. You can pay for a car, for a home, for a business, for education. So say for example you're borrowing at an interest rate of 5%, utilizing that 10,000 that you put in as collateral, right? So you're using their money, using their 7,500 to then pay off the credit card. So say for example your credit card balance was $2,000. You would use 2,000 out of that 7,500 to pay off the credit card balance. Then you'll see the interest rate is say between 7 to 29%. What you would then do is you pay that entire balance off, so you no longer have that balance on the credit card. You do have a balance in your bank. So what do? We take those same credit card payments that we're paying to the credit card company, you pay it right back to your bank. So if you're paying $200 a month to the credit card company, you pay it right back to your bank. What does that do? That replenishes the bank that you use, that you have, that you created, right? but it also gets that debt off of your credit statement, so that can increase your credit, right? But then you literally consumed that outside debt and put it back to yourself. And this is why I said you have to understand the principles of being a good banker and a good customer. You have to pay yourself back. That's one of the most important things with the infinite banking concept. Paying yourself back. And now you're recapturing and reclaiming all the interest paid. Because remember, when you're paying that 29%, that's extra money you're paying to the bank on top of the money you loaned that you borrowed. You're paying yourself back that interest rate now. So this is the power of the infinite banking concept. Now remember, when you went to the traditional bank, you put your money in there and you need a loan. So they gave you money after you put it in there. You then put it in the zone of opportunity for you to pay off your credit card. What happens after you pay the credit card? The money goes to the bank. That's it. That flow doesn't go back to you. It goes right back to the bank. Oh, by the way, let me go back because I forgot to mention something very important. As that money flows back to you, so say for example you had 7,500 and then you used $2,000, it went down to 5,500. Can I do math? Yes, it went down to 5,500. As you put, so say for example you put back $100 in there, right? So you put $100 back in there every 2 weeks. It goes from 55. You have 5,500 that you can use. Now, when you put the $100 back in, you have 5,600. You have that $100 that you just put back in there. You can then use that $100 again for something else. So you're recapturing the money that you spent, but as soon as you put it back in there, if there's an opportunity for you to invest and to get more of the spread from somewhere else, you can then put it back out there. Now, if you were the sad man at the bank, once you pay the bank off, right, the money goes back to the bank. You don't recapture that, so you can't then spend the money else on some other investment. That's the power of the infinite banking concept. It's not just borrowing from your policy to buy a car or whatever. No, no, no. It's you taking back control of the banking functions in your life. You become the bank. You taking the payments that you pay somebody else, and then you pay yourself that payment. And as you repay yourself back that payment, you don't have to let it sit. You can send that money back out there to go back to work for you. Infinite banking process. Now, if you look at it, the bank themselves, they made their own infinite banking process. Because look, as you pay them back their money, it goes back to them. They're going to then put it back into the opportunity zone or the zone of opportunity and give somebody else a credit card a loan, somebody else a car loan, somebody else a home loan, somebody else a business loan, somebody else an education loan. And guess what? They're going to be just like you, sad like you, putting money back in there. Infinite banking concept. Powerful stuff. So, infinite banking process, like I said, this is you take the money, put it there, and it comes back. I think we got that. And again, it's used for paying off higher interest debt. It's used for purchasing cash flow, assets, and also investing into your education. Because once you get more educated, you'll then be able to obtain more, and you can pay yourself back. And by education, I do not mean college. I'm not speaking against college, but by education, what I mean is something that's actually tangible that you can use to actually create cash flow in your life close to immediately. Okay, now here are the dangers when it comes to the infinite banking process. Number one, over leveraging. Okay, so in this example, do I have it here? Nope, nope, go back. So in this example here, right? So if I was to pull out and I was to buy a home, right? And I overextended myself on how much I can pull out, right? And then the home, so it was an investment property, but then the market's down, and so the income from that is not going into you. You will then be over leveraged because you're overextending yourself, so you have too much debt in relationship to the cash flow that's coming back inside of you. So we have to be careful when we're pulling out to make sure we're investing into a cash flowing asset that can turn around quickly, but that we can also liquidate if need be to retain and recapture that, so we can invest into something else. So be careful with over leveraging. We can also become over leveraged. So we over leverage if the maturity time is too long. We over leverage when we purchase to consume and not to actually reinvest. That's also how we do that. Another danger is if you have a discomfort with leverage. Listen, the infinite banking process is not for everybody. There are people who believe in being debt free, paying things off, and never touching anything else. That is okay. That is okay. This process is not for you. If you're a person who wants peace, who doesn't want to deal with the constant cycles and managing all the accounts that comes with it. Because let me tell you something, if you're not very careful in how you manage it, you can actually, like I said, it's like a car. It can be very destructive. You can put yourself in a position where you're highly taxed, right? So if you earning too much income and you don't balance it out with with leverage, you're now put yourself in a as a taxable event. So you're taxed on it. If you're if you're just not okay with managing multiple accounts, you can lose track, misappropriate things, miss a payment back into your thing. So it's not for everybody. And then the third thing is the dangers with this is what infinite banking vehicle you choose. Some of them are better than others, but at the end of the day, it's all about the process first, then the vehicle. So let's talk about this machine, right? So the machine is this. So you can have many things be, well, not many, but you can have several things be used for the infinite banking concept. So one thing you can use as your machine, credit cards. You can utilize your credit card as a means for you to borrow against, to put out, and recapture that and pay off a credit card bill. It requires a quicker time for you to pay it off. But there are some instances in which, say for example, if you had a high balance of $100,000 or a high limit, $100,000 on your card, right? And then there was a real estate course that you want to take that was $2,000. You can borrow against your policy, take the real estate course, and then pay back, heck, $10 or $100 a month to your credit card bill. It doesn't have to be that much. Why? That utilization is under 10%. So you're in a good spot. You can utilize that, right? The problem is, remember, when it comes to dangers, if you have a lower limit and then what you're trying to spend is more expensive, and if it's greater than 30% of your utilization on your credit card, that becomes problematic because then again, at the end of the day, you're paying back interest, X, Y, and Z. So you don't want to do that. So credit cards can be a machine. Is it the most effective machine? It depends, right? So it can be used, say for example, if you have high limits, you can actually utilize that to buy real estate really quickly. I mean, if you have a really good deal, buy really quickly, and then use the cash flow and assets to pay it back. That is a thing that you can use. It all depends. Now, another machine you can use, stock options. So if you own stocks, you can borrow up to about 40 to 50% on your stock to buy other assets, buy other stocks, right? The thing is, that can be a good option if you're in the stock market. If you're really good at stock trading, that can be an option. The problem is that the stock market is very volatile. So if it comes within a certain range, I'm going to make it very simple. If it falls or rises between a certain range, it will fall out of its margin range, which means that it falls out of its safety range. So at the end of the day, they'll call the margin or they'll tell you, hey, you have to pay your loan back. And so while it can be used for IBC, it may not be the best tool because of the volatility that comes with the stock market. But at the end of the day, wealthy individuals do utilize their stocks, especially when they have a lot of them, like Elon Musk, right? So he'll lend out, he doesn't take any income, but he'll loan out his stocks to banks X, Y, and Z, raise the stock of Tesla, and then at the end of the day, they'll pay it back. He'll pay back the loan by how much is raised. And at the end of the day, he'll make a spread. The banks make a spread. Everybody wins, but it's up to him to raise the price of the stock. So stock options can absolutely be a play if you have a lot of stocks. Same thing with credit cards. If you have a higher limit, it is a play. If it's a lower limit, I would not recommend it if you're not comfortable with the strategy. Another machine that you can use for the infinite banking concept is your 401k and retirement plans. So you can literally borrow against your 401k, your retirement plan, and purchase assets. Totally doable. A thing I personally don't like 401ks and retirement plans, but it is a good option for those who say, for example, wants to get into real estate, they want to purchase their first home. You can borrow against your 401k, no problem. Roth IRA as well, right? Now, the downside to that, kind of like the stock option, is, well, not stock option, excuse me. The downside to that is that you have to be employed, right? And what they'll typically do is they'll take from your paycheck, so you're actually reducing your cash flow that comes in from your job, right? And so until if you invest in real estate until those cash flow comes in from the real estate, it kind of, you're kind of at a loss of cash flow, right? It does eventually wash out. And also by you purchasing that real estate, if it's an investment real estate, you can use a cost segregated analysis, and you can offset that on your taxes, so you can actually get some returns. There's things you can play around with. But at the end of the day, let's not get too into the weeds. At the end of the day, 401ks are also good, but it can play into your cash flow when you're coming from your W-2 work. Okay. So another machine you can use also is the HELOC, which is the home equity line of credit. I like this one a lot. I really like HELOCs, right? At the end of the day, it's a really good one as well. You can borrow against the value of your home. Actually, there's a strategy out there in which you can actually take a HELOC loan, home equity line of credit, and actually pay off your mortgage a lot faster. If you're not comfortable with leverage, you can pay off your home and within, I think they said, 7 to 10 years versus the 30 if you use the HELOC correctly. And so at the end of the day, there's many machines you can use for the machine, right? Because all it does is it changes one thing. You change where you put your savings first, and then you add the component of leverage on there, and then you use the process. Now, for me, all right. So yeah, again, I was just going to show you how you can use your credit card, but I think we get that. So for me, the king of machines you can use for the infinite banking concept is your whole life insurance policy. But it has to be specially engineered and designed for the infinite banking concept. Okay? Now, why do we use whole life? Well, there's many good things, right? So number one, guaranteed rate of return. So some policies, I'm going to give you very loose numbers. Do not quote me on these. Very loose numbers, but I guarantee. So some of the guarantees you're looking at between maybe 3.5% to 4% every year, right? You're going to get that interest rate. You also possibly can get the dividend. Dividends are not guaranteed, but we're looking at anywhere between maybe 1.5% to 2%. So for the sake of illustration, not even illustration, but for the sake of this example, we want to say we're getting 6% interest from our guaranteed and from our dividends, right? Another thing is you get compounding interest inside of the whole life policy. Compounding interest. What's more impressive about this is uninterrupted compounding interest. That is the beauty of it, right? And then on top of that, it compounds tax-free. You don't have to do that. You don't have to pay taxes on it. So great. So now you're putting your savings inside of a vehicle that compounds tax-free. In a traditional savings account, as it compounds, you have to pay taxes on that interest rate. It comes out as ordinary income. Inside your life insurance policy, it doesn't. What else? It's also a tax-free death benefit as well, if structured correctly. And that, at the end of the day, it's also protected against liens and judgments. I misspelled judgments. How dare me? We're just going to change that real quick. All right. Now, the requirements. There's some basic requirements. There's other things too, but there's some basic requirements for this. All whole life insurance policies aren't created equal. So we want to have a whole life insurance policy that is with a mutually owned insurance company is participating. So all that means is they share their the profits with their policyholders. We don't want to use a stock company like Allstate. It's for profit. We want to be with a mutually owned. For the infinite banking concept, we want to minimize the death benefit. We want to maximize the PUA. PUA is paid up pensions. We're not going to get into the details. I'm just going to say it like this. All the PUA is, for simple terms, is on top of your actual life insurance. It's the extra money you're giving to the life insurance company to make investments with. That's all you need to be concerned with. That's it. And also, we also need to make sure it doesn't MEC or it follows within the MEC 7 rules. Again, not going to get into the details. All you need to know is that we need to make sure we have enough death benefit to how much we're putting into the policy so it's not an investment. That's all you need to know. Yeah. All right, cool. So How does it work? How does it work with the whole life policy? It's very simple. So, first of all, we're going to replace our savings with the whole life insurance policy, right? Our money's going to grow at a guaranteed rate and possible dividend. So, for this example, close to 6%. Money's going to grow with uninterrupted compounding interest. We'll then be able to borrow a percentage of a cash value in a policy. It varies by design. Some can do 60%, some 75%, some 90%, right? And then also, the borrowed funds is considered to be an advancement of your death benefit. So what that means is this: is that even if you are a bad banker and you don't put money back into your whole life policy, which you shouldn't do, you should always put money back in there. Even if you don't even if you don't pay back your loans, I'm not gonna say it's gonna be okay, but it's just going to be, once you graduate, it's going to be reduced from your death benefit. That's all that means. But, you still have to pay the interest rate on there. So even if you don't pay the whole balance off, you still have to pay the interest rates every year for them to want to lend to you in the future. Just add that little detail, because they always say you never have to pay it back. Yeah, I really hate when they say that. You still have to pay the interest rate. You know, they want to, And then also remember, when I gave the warnings with this, right? So one of the warnings is you over leveraging yourself, right? So when you over leverage yourself, when you buy too much debt, if you have problems making the premiums on the policy, and if the cash value is exhausted from the premiums, your policy can possibly lapse. If you have a loan on your policy and your policy lapses and you want to reinstate it, guess what you have to do? Pay all the loans back on the policy. You have to pay the premiums, you have to pay the interest on the premiums, and you have to possibly retest for insurability to get your policy back. So again, this is why I say it's like a car. It's very cool, it's very great to drive, but it's also very dangerous, because if you are sniffing the cocaine like the banks do, over leveraging yourself, and then you fell, because remember, this is your bank. The banks are freaking crackheads, all right? So if you're doing what the banks do, what the current banks do, and just over leverage yourself, and you lose your policy, it may make it harder for you then to reinstate your policy, to restart your bank back up. Okay? So again, we already went through why we use whole life. Now, here's how it looks here's the infinite banking process with the whole life policy. So you are paid, in this example, 6% compounding interest. You borrow at 5% simple interest. Okay, so here's what we see. So even if you borrow, right, and the companies, you get your guaranteed interest rate return, and you get the dividend that year, you're still making potentially a 1% spread on your money. Even by borrowing your money, you're still making 1% interest, right? Now, why I highlighted the difference between compound interest and simple interest is because it's 1% year one. As you go throughout the years, right, it's compounding interest. So it's interest on top of all the money that you have over and over, right? That 1%, if you always borrow, that 1% spread that you're getting, it actually increases to 1, 1.5, 1, 1.1, 1.3, 1.7, close to 2, X, Y, and Z. Why? Because what you're getting paid is compounded by all the money that you put in there. You're being charged a 5% simple rate. So you're actually making more money as time goes on. This is why the whole life policy, I believe, is the king of the machines that you're going to use, because that spread gets thicker and thicker and thicker as you borrow and as you get paid the compounding interest. So how does this happen? So with the whole life policy, we take it out, we put it into the zone of opportunity, right? So if it's a credit card, we pay $200 back, right? Now, this is where most people will stop at. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to cheat you. I'm going to give you why I say why it is a complex banking structure. Because of this. You see, here's how it actually operates. So you put your money into your policy, you borrow against the cash value that you have in there. After you take the money out, you get a check in the mail. You will then have to deposit that check somewhere. You see, I would not recommend you depositing it inside of like your regular checking account that's used for everything else, because there's a lot of transaction that happens there. Once you have this, we create what's called a segregated bank account. This bank account is used specifically for your payments, for getting money from from the banking, the whole life, to put into the account to be used elsewhere. So you put that money into your segregated account, and then from your segregated account, you then put it into the zone of opportunity, or you put it into another account. I layer it into another account, right? Just so I can have traceability, because I want a one-to-one. Okay. So you put it in a segregated account, you put it into another account, and then you put it into the zone of opportunity. After you paid that zone off, right? So after you pay that debt or you bought that asset, once you start making recurring payments back into your system, you take it from the zone of opportunity, put it back into that segregated account, so you can have checks and balances. The reason why we do this is for tax season, right? So just in case you get audited, you want to have a clean record of where all those payments from your policy went, and so it's one-to-one. You don't want to have it inside of a checking account that you use quite frequently. You have to have this, and this is why I say another downside to this infinite banking concept is if you're not comfortable with managing multiple accounts, it just may not be for you. Now, what happens is this: the interesting thing about the infinite banking concept. I want to stand up so bad, Ray, but I'm cool. So the interesting thing about the infinite banking concept is this: is that after a while, you're going to pay all that money back to that debt that you had, right? So then, but remember, you borrowed at 5%. That interest rate was 7 to 29%. So now you have a spread. I don't know if you can see it right here. You have a spread of 2 to 24%. That can't go back into that policy. You can't stuff it back into that policy, because how the whole life policy is written, you have a maximum amount of cash flow you have a maximum amount of money that you can put into the policy every year, and it's standard, stuck at that level. So what do we then do with that extra spread that we made back? Because remember, we were paying the company that interest rate. We're now paying ourselves that extra interest rate. So now that's a good problem. We have to now figure out, what are we going to do with all the extra money? So we can put it into your living wealth account. So if we recall from week 2, the living wealth account is the account where you put about 3% to 5% of your money from automatically deposited there from your paycheck, and then you can spend that money however you want to do it guilt-free. You can take that extra spread and put it into the living wealth account and spend it as a payment and a thank you to yourself. You can do that. You can also take it from that segregated account and put it back into the zone of opportunity and find another deal, find another asset, find something else to pay. So then you're creating that infinite cycle within that infinite cycle, and it just keeps going and going and going and going and going. And this is the power of the infinite banking concept using the whole life policy. There's just no other vehicle that is as rich as the whole life policy. Because remember, all the time, I'm standing up again, Ray. Sorry. All the time, your cash is sitting inside of the bank account, not being touched. It's a savings account where your money is growing, compounding interest all over and over and over, every year. You never take money out of here, ever. It stays in there. What happens is, again, they give you a loan in the cash value. So they're taking their money. It's the bank's money that they're giving to you for you to then put into the zone of opportunity. So your money is staying there, going over and over, and that's why I say it's a two-pronged approach. And this is where it makes sense to exercise compound interest, not by buying index funds and letting it sit there, because you're not actively doing anything and you're not taking back the banking functions of your life. But by using this, your money stays growing over and over and over, and you're using some other people's money to have proper stewardship to actually increase your cash flow, utilizing, stop it, Siri, the velocity of money and increasing your cash flow over and over and over. So, the whole life insurance policy is the king of machines for the infinite banking concept. Give me a second. I just really feel excited about that. I love this. All right. So, are IUL's Index Universal Life policies evil? No. No. They're not evil. They're not bad. I don't like this question of it, if it's good or bad. It is not bad. We have to understand certain things, right? So we have to understand before we even get there. We have to understand that when it comes to policies or anything in finances, that everything here are tools, and you need to have the right tool for the right job. Okay, so IULs for the infinite banking concept, unfortunately, is not the right tool, but it does not make it a bad policy. It just doesn't. The IULs are really, really good for retirement, in my estimation, especially like 20, 30 years down the road. Because it's tied to the market, that extra time allows for the market to correct itself, and you can actually have a really good return after retirement or when you graduate. I think it's actually best for your graduation, not even retirement, because I don't I don't advocate if you have an IUL policy to pull your money out of the IUL policy. Let the thing continue until you graduate and let it be used as an estate for your family to pass on to the next generation. That's what IULs are good for, in my estimation. It's not a bad tool. I just can't. It's like when you have a hammer, right? You have a metal hammer and you have a rubber mallet hammer, right? There are certain times in which you can't use the metal hammer because it'll mess things up. Ask me, I know. I broke my glass on my car using a metal instead of using rubber. So, end of the day, IULs are perfectly fine when used in the right place for the infinite banking concept, because there's so much complexity, because there's so much movement, because there's certain things that it depends on. It's not the best tool, and so we'll take a little look at that, right? So differences, right? So your traditional whole life, it's more predictable. It's due to your bond exposure. IULs are more volatile. It's due to the market exposure via indexing, right? So when you get your IUL, you can choose from whatever index X, Y, and Z, and then it's again tied to the market. The whole life is investments. The investment return is the insurance company's responsibility. So at the beginning of your policy, of your whole life policy, they give you an illustration, right? And this illustration, it tells you what you can expect from the policy. You can expect to see how the policy performs throughout the life of the contract, right? It's the insurance company's responsibility to make sure it hits the illustration as closely as possible. When you have the IUL, that return investment is actually offloaded to the customer because you choose you choose the indexing, so it's offloaded to you. So remember, it's on a dividend credit rate. The whole life is, and IULs, you pick your indexes, and then the liability of it, like I said, it's on the company versus it being on the customer. The risk is transferred to the customer with IULs. Also, when it comes to borrowing, you get consistent guaranteed rate of return with traditional whole life. As we saw in that example, that was a key assumption. That was a key point that we had to use when we're talking about borrowing against the policy and creating that spread. By having that guaranteed rate of return, and almost not guaranteed, but almost guaranteed dividend rate, if you choose the right company that has a long history, 100+ years of paying dividends, you can almost have a close estimation of what is that guaranteed spread, right? And so we need that when we talk about the infinite banking concept, because we need to know what is in bounds, what is out of bounds. With the IULs, we don't have that guaranteed rate of return. It's variable. It depends on how the index performs. So with that being said, with us operating within IBC, we can't be unsure of those returns, because we then don't know how to leverage, because at the end of the day, you can be at a perfectly leveraged position with those guarantees, but when you transfer to IULs, your leverage changes based off of the market, not even you. So that's one reason why it changes in the borrowing. Also, the cash value shown in year one, you have pretty much access to it if structured correctly. With the IUL, you have surrender charges. All you need to know about that is, I'm not going to get into details. IULs are the most complex form out there, but all you need to know is that you're locked out of access to your cash value due to higher commission fees. So, say for example, you put $10,000 there, the high commission fees. The insurance company then has to figure out a way to recoup some of the money, so they put you under surrender period, and then you don't have access to the cash value. So it illustrates you have $10,000 in cash value, and you can get 8,000, but you really can only get $2,000. That's too much into the details, but at the end of the day, it throws a huge monkey wrench in your plans when you're talking about utilizing that cash value to then spend elsewhere and accelerate your money. And then the last thing is the guaranteed cost of insurance. So if you have a 10-year, 12-year, 10-year pay, 12-year pay, 15-year pay, etc., right? You know that the cost that you paid for is guaranteed during that time. With the IULs, because IULs is built on a term chassis, your insurance can the adjusted internal cost of insurance in the later years is volatile. It can go up, it can go down. It's built on a term chassis. At the end of the day, I want you guys to understand this: is that both IUL and whole life policy are tools. And so think of it like this: they're whole life policies, and so they're a chassis. Okay, so you know about that chassis. So when you have a chassis, so pretty much the same chassis in the sense of it gives a death benefit and it's made to insure you, right? So that's the base. But as you go through the assembly line, and the fact that as you're building out these policies, you'll find at the top end there's two completely different vehicles used for two completely different things. Your whole life policy is a Swiss Army knife. Your IUL is like an off-roading, Jeep Cherokee. It's very rough, it's very complex, all that jazz, right? But at the end of the day, it's not bad. It just is what it is. It's a very complex policy that may not be the best for the infinite banking concept. Well, it's not the best. So, which is better? The policy is good or bad. There are two different tools. The best structure for IBC, traditional whole life. IUL is good for tool for retirement, as you can catch the ups and downs where it swings of the market. At the end of the day, I prefer my whole life policy for the infinite banking concept, and I hope you guys understood what it was, and that's all I have for you. Preguntas, questions. I don't know. I don't.
So I know you said it was good to have a segregated bank account.
Yes.
So what is that? It's just like a bank account where you only use for your whole life
Oh, that's
policy
a
money.
great question because I didn't cover that in detail. I should have. Thank you, Kiki. So your segregated account is a checking account. I do not recommend high yield savings. I do not recommend a savings account. I recommend a checking account because it allows you to transfer money as fast as possible. You have unlimited transactions to go there. So literally, all that account is a proxy account that records the transaction that I pulled from my life insurance policy. I've dumped it here, and then after you put it into the account, you then can put it, into another account, or you can put it into the zone of opportunity. But it's a proxy account utilized. It's checking account. It's a proxy account that is utilized to keep checks and balances. So when it comes down for taxes and auditing, right, you can have that clear pathway of saying, okay, yeah, I took this out on this date. I put it here this date. It went out to there on this date, X, Y, and Z. You don't want to subdivide it. You want to pay the entire thing to whatever that zone of opportunity is. Please.
You were talking about using credit cards to for your flow.
Hmm.
What percentage is good for you to do that if you're gonna borrow that from the bank, and then because you said if you borrow from the bank at 7 and then you do whatever at 5,
Yeah, you borrow five
then
and then you coop seven. Yeah. So my suggestions for credit cards are you want to take out anything. I personally like taking out an amount less than 10 to 15% of the limit.
and the percentage should be a couple of points.
At, at that point, I mean, you have to do it in comparison to your credit card rate. So right now it's like around 29%. But if it's low enough, right, and you have cash flow, it wouldn't. 10% won't hurt you as long as you pay it, you recoup it back into it. So you pay whatever it all. So you would use up to 15% of what you have on the credit card to go to the zone of opportunity, and then you pay it back to your credit card incrementally. But because 10 to 15% is like below the 30% limit, right? I really want to say less than 10%, honestly, because 10% is like the number, it's like the sweet spot. So let's just say 10%. So at 10%, right? Even if you don't pay it for a couple of months, you're still at a good position where they're not going to, or if you don't pay it all, still pay it per month. If you don't pay it all, you had a good ratio where it's not going to affect your credit that badly. Do you agree? Okay. You're the credit expert.
You got a question? Oh, I was talking about, you said, when you talk about credit utilization, is that all your stuff together? All your, everything together, and then you, um, keep your limit at 10%, or is that just certain cards, or just everything?
It's all together. It's all together. It's all together. I personally like. Well, I only have two cards, so I like to keep it on the card on 10%. But it's all of your credit all together.
Okay.
Hmm.
Um, I have another one. Um, Another question is, you were talking about your 401 versus whole life.
Hmm.
What how do I put it? You, when you borrow from your 401,
Hmm.
you said that it has to be for utilization, right? For you to be making uh, um,
When you borrow from your 401k, so the one that's tied to your place of employment, so you typically pay back into it through, it comes directly out of your paycheck. But then the second thing, when it comes to, and this is for all the vehicles in the IBC, we're not using it for consumption spending. We're using it for something that will
that's gonna
generate a
make
spread.
some more
Yes.
income.
So it's either for an asset or it's for paying off a debt that has a higher interest rate
I got you.
than what you're borrowing for.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye, mother. Gonna play drums. Sweet. And we're done. Look what you did. Huh? Yeah, yeah. Good. Oh, see you. Thank you.